I am Evelyn Monroe, 34 years old, and until last month, I thought I understood what it meant to be part of a family. I was not born a Monroe. I was adopted when I was 5, brought into a world of champagne brunches, Christmas cards signed by all, and endless photographs on grand staircases. Even as a child, I could sense that my place was conditional. My hidden strength, the thing no one in my family ever acknowledged, was my ability to build a life from nothing, a life that, as it turned out, would one day finance all of theirs. It was a Thursday morning in April, the day before my adopted sister, Charlotte's wedding, when my world cracked open. My phone buzzed as I stepped out of the shower. There in the family group chat, where for years I had been the silent paymaster and reliable fixer, was a single message. "We need space from you. Please don't show up today or reach out to the family anymore." Before I could even reply, my name vanished from the chat. I checked Instagram, blocked by every Monroe. The laughter of strangers drifted in from the courtyard below as I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching a gold-embossed wedding invitation I'd paid for, realizing I was, for all practical purposes, an orphan again. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from. If you have ever felt like the outsider in your own family, you might want to stay with me. My story is not one of sudden fortune, but of slow-burning betrayal. Charlotte, the golden child, was 5 years younger than me, radiant and clever, the daughter my adopted parents always dreamed of. Olivia, the youngest, played at being an influencer, blessed with the Monroe smile and a self-confidence that seemed to grow with each new follower. Their childhood was a parade of recitals, trophies, and family vacations to Italy and Nantucket. When Charlotte landed her first job out of college at a magazine owned by a family friend, my parents threw a dinner party for 50 guests. When I graduated magna cum laude from Columbia and landed a job on Wall Street, my father shook my hand and said, "Well, you've always been so serious. Don't let it go to your head." The contrast never faded. At birthday parties, Charlotte was given a pony and 100 guests. Mine were quiet affairs because adopted children sometimes need less stimulation. My 10th birthday was canceled altogether. Charlotte had a fever, so we'll do something later. Nothing ever came. At 16, when Olivia crashed her new car, the family gathered in the kitchen to comfort her, murmuring about the dangers of city driving. When I got my first ticket, $45 for parking near the subway, my father made me pay it from my after-school job and lectured me on gratitude. But the real history was measured in dollars and silence. When Charlotte wanted to study abroad, the family couldn't quite afford it until I quietly transferred $50,000 from my trust fund left to me by my birth parents, but managed for years by my adopted family for safekeeping. When Olivia's influencer career needed a boost, another $80,000 for wardrobe travel just until her big break. Even when my father's real estate project failed, leaving a debt of over $600,000, it was I who leveraged my portfolio to secure a loan signing over my own apartment as collateral. They thanked me, of course, with the kind of gratitude reserved for generous strangers. If you have ever been the reliable one nobody appreciates, you know the particular ache of writing checks you'll never see returned, not just in money but in love and loyalty. I should have seen it coming, really. The wedding had grown more elaborate by the month: designer flowers, custom invitations, a ballroom at the plaza, and every time the bill came due, my mother's voice would drift through the phone, soft and rehearsed. "Evelyn, I know you're busy, but Charlotte's special day deserves a little magic, don't you think? Besides, you'll always be part of this family." So I paid. $200,000 here, $25,000 there. My signature sat quietly on the bottom of every contract, invisible to the guests who would soon dance beneath 1,000 lights. What I did not know, what I could not have imagined, was that the night before Charlotte's wedding, my family would erase me completely. No explanation. No confrontation. Just a message as cold as the marble floors I once polished with my bare feet to earn their praise. As I sat there, my phone still in my hand, I realized that every dollar I had ever given had purchased not belonging, but a carefully managed exclusion. If you've ever felt that the world you built could be taken away with a single sentence, you understand my silence that morning. I had no idea that the next day, in a ballroom filled with people I thought were mine, everything would change forever. Growing up as a Monroe meant living inside a gilded picture frame, one I never quite fit. I was 5 when I first walked through the doors of the brownstone on East 79th, suitcase in hand, knuckles white as Mrs. Monroe smiled tightly, and Mr. Monroe shook hands with the caseworker. They told their friends I was a blessing, a little miracle to fill their home with laughter. But even then I knew I was there to fill an empty seat, not a longing heart. It wasn't that my adopted parents were cruel. They believed in charity. But real love, I learned, had rules in their world, unwritten, quietly enforced. Charlotte and Olivia were Monroe by blood, with their mother's clear eyes and their father's jaw. At family dinners, I was always placed at the far end of the table. In photographs, I stood on the edge. When Charlotte won her first debate trophy, the house filled with flowers and applause. When I won the city math championship, Mr. Monroe glanced at the ribbon and said, "Not everyone needs to be good at sports." My birth parents had left a small inheritance for me, the only thing that was truly mine. But as a child, I signed every document my adopted parents slid across the table, trusting their warm assurances. "This is just so we can protect what's yours, Evelyn. Family looks after family." By the time I was 16, my name appeared on none of the accounts. Every financial decision, college tuition, car purchases, trust fund withdrawals went through Monroe hands. Even so, I tried to earn my keep, taking part-time jobs through high school, saving every dollar, bringing home report cards covered in A's, hoping one day it would mean I belonged for real. As the years passed, my role became quietly fixed. If there was a problem, I was the solution. When Olivia dropped out of college, influencer marketing is the future mom, it was Evelyn who paid for her re-enrollment, the social media boot camps, the rent on her downtown loft. When Mr. Monroe lost a lawsuit over a failed property deal, I remortgaged my own apartment to cover his debts. Each time I told myself, this is what family does. But I noticed as I grew older that I was only invited to the table when there was trouble, never for joy. Even birthday cards began to carry a tone of polite obligation. "Thank you for all you do, Evelyn." That was the refrain, repeated year after year. There were hints over time that something was amiss. The trust fund that was supposed to be released on my 30th birthday was delayed. "Just a legal issue, dear." When I asked for the paperwork, Mrs. Monroe waved me away. "You must trust us. You wouldn't want to make things awkward, would you?" I overheard hushed conversations late at night. Once I found an old letter in Mr. Monroe's office written by my birth mother with instructions that the fund was to be transferred to me, no exceptions, at age 35. The signature was hers. It haunted me. It was during these years that I found one true ally, Margaret Reed, my mentor and later my attorney. Margaret was sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, a woman who saw through silk curtains and polite smiles. "They're using you, Evelyn," she told me over coffee one winter morning when I hesitated over signing yet another family document. "No gratitude, no contract. Be careful whom you trust." I laughed it off at the time, still clinging to hope that if I gave enough time, money, forgiveness, I would finally be accepted. But the pattern was set. Charlotte's wedding planning became a months-long exercise in my exclusion. Every decision was made in group texts from which I was mysteriously absent. When I volunteered to help with the seating chart, I was told, "You're too busy, Evelyn. Just relax and enjoy the party." Invoices arrived, however, addressed to me. "For your records, we know you like to keep things organized." Each time I signed a check, I felt a little further from the family I was paying to keep together. You might wonder why I stayed. Why I kept paying, kept hoping. The truth is, family for those who have lost it is an ache that never quite heals. You keep reaching for it even as it pulls away. As the wedding approached, I sensed a chill in every call, a hesitation in every reply. My name disappeared from social posts, event emails, and eventually from the Monroe family website altogether. If you have ever watched yourself fade from photographs of your own life, you know what I felt that spring. Little did I realize behind every smile and thank you plans were being laid not for celebration but for erasure. The night before the wedding, I sat with Margaret in her small office, stacks of documents between us. She placed a hand on mine. "It's time to stop begging for scraps, Evelyn. It's time to find out what's really yours." I didn't know it yet, but that night was the end of the Monroe story and the beginning of my own. The wedding day dawned bright, every window on Fifth Avenue reflecting light into a city still shaking off the chill of early spring. I rose early, habit more than hope, guiding my hands as I slipped into the dress I'd bought for Charlotte's celebration. Pale blue silk, simple and elegant, chosen for a day I never imagined would turn so cold. Outside, the plaza, black cars spilled guests onto the sidewalk, laughter echoing off the marble. I hesitated, invitation in hand, watching as well-dressed strangers swept inside. For a long moment, I stood there, an outsider at the door of a world I had funded but never truly joined. I told myself I was just early, that my name would still be on the list. I tried the revolving door, stepped through the gold and glass into a lobby bright with fresh flowers and white tablecloths. But at the check-in table, the planner's assistant, someone I'd met half a dozen times, stared down at her list, her brows drawn together. "I'm sorry. You're not on the guest list, Miss Monroe." She looked up, her voice, gentle but final. "The family's asked that you not attend." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The ballroom beyond the doors was filled with music and voices I knew by heart. Somewhere inside, Charlotte was laughing. Olivia was already posting on her phone. My parents, my so-called parents, were greeting the guests. All of it paid for by me, yet not a single space left for me. If you've ever stood outside your own family's party holding an invitation that is nothing but paper, you'll understand the humiliation that burned through me. A security guard hired for the day approached and spoke quietly. "Miss Monroe, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." The family was quite clear. People turned. A few guests, some I'd known since childhood, whispered and averted their eyes. Someone, perhaps Olivia herself, was already filming. I heard the chime of a message notification, then another. Within minutes, a short video me being turned away at the door was posted to Charlotte's Instagram story. "Sometimes you have to make hard choices for family harmony," the caption read. I made my way out into the city, pride stiffening my spine even as shame threatened to crumple me. My phone vibrated in my pocket, dozens of notifications, flooding in screenshots, forwarded messages, a viral TikTok with 500,000 views already. "Bride's sister kicked out of wedding, find out why." The comments were merciless. Entitled much, should have known her place. This house was never hers. It wasn't the first time I'd been humiliated, but it was the first time it happened in public for all the world to see. At home, my inbox filled with automated notices removed from family bank accounts, social media groups, and even the Monroe Foundation board I'd served for years. In a single day, I was erased not just from a party but from a legacy. The only message that offered any warmth was from Margaret. "Come by my office tonight," she wrote. "I think you'll want to see what I found." When dusk fell, I sat in Margaret's small conference room, the city's glow falling through the window. She placed a folder on the table, her hand steady, eyes bright. Inside, I found copies of documents my birth mother had signed. Letters to the Monroe family, instructions that my trust fund and all assets were to be turned over to me, no strings attached, upon my 35th birthday. I saw in a shaky hand my mother's hopes for me. "Give Evelyn what is hers regardless of circumstance. Do not withhold." There was more. Margaret had uncovered a video security footage from a bank showing Mrs. Monroe and Mr. Monroe years ago, meeting with a lawyer and requesting changes to the trust fund arrangements. The signatures were different, forced. Margaret explained quietly that she suspected forgery, that there was legal recourse if I wanted to pursue it. I sat back, heart pounding, not with pain but with the sharp edge of something new. Anger, maybe. Or the beginnings of resolve. That night, social media flared again. Charlotte posted a photo of her first dance. Olivia shared a TikTok mocking family drama. My phone chimed with a final message from Mrs. Monroe herself. "You should be grateful they even let you in the family photo." The words echoed in my mind as I stared at the city below. For the first time in years, I felt the ground steady beneath me, not because I was included, but because I was finally ready to fight for what was mine. If you have ever had everything taken from you in a single day, you know the peculiar mix of grief and clarity that comes next. Little did my family know their efforts to erase me would become the very reason I finally reclaimed myself. It's a strange thing the way humiliation once endured can harden into something else, resolve maybe, or a kind of cold courage. The morning after the wedding, I woke early and for the first time in months didn't reach for my phone. I let the sun warm my face, drank my coffee in silence, and allowed myself to consider the truth. I owed the Monroe family nothing more. By noon, I was in Margaret's office again. She greeted me with a nod, the folder of evidence resting between us. "I've filed an injunction," she said, voice crisp. "They cannot touch your assets until the court reviews the documents. We'll request a forensic analysis on the trust fund paperwork and the will changes. If there's even a whisper of forgery or coercion, we'll prove it." It was surreal sitting on one side of the table with Margaret while across the city the Monroe family scrambled to contain a scandal of their own making. By afternoon, my inbox was overflowing with requests from journalists, socialites, and even a few distant relatives. The story was spreading. The adopted daughter, cast out after funding the golden child's wedding, had hired a lawyer and was challenging the family trust. Margaret moved quickly. She collected every bank record, every signed contract, and crucially the original video footage from the bank vault that showed my birth mother's explicit instructions. She arranged meetings with handwriting experts and trust law specialists, each one confirming what Margaret suspected: the signatures on the Monroe modified documents were inconsistent. There were gaps in the paperwork, dates that did not align, notary stamps that were expired, phone logs that contradicted the official story. The legal process took weeks, but in that time something inside me settled. The city felt different now. I was no longer walking through life as a guest, but as someone determined to reclaim her seat at the table. The Monroe family, meanwhile, began to unravel. Charlotte's wedding video was quietly taken down after a surge of negative comments. Olivia's social media presence faltered, sponsors and followers turned cold as the rumors spread. Mr. Monroe's business partners withdrew from deals, worried about association with ongoing legal issues. A week before the hearing, I received an email from Mrs. Monroe. "There's no need for this to get ugly. We can settle this like family. You know we always had your best interests at heart. No apology. Only fear and entitlement." Margaret responded for me. "All future communication will go through counsel." At the courthouse, the truth came out in full daylight. The judge reviewed the original will, my birth mother's letters, the video evidence, and expert testimony about the doctored paperwork. I watched from the plaintiff's table as Mr. Monroe's lawyer fumbled through explanations. The judge's ruling was swift. The Monroe family was ordered to return all assets belonging to me, including the full trust fund, the Manhattan condominium, and a controlling share in the family foundation valued together at over $13 million. The family was barred from accessing any of my accounts or investments effective immediately. The court referred the matter of potential fraud to the district attorney for further review. When the verdict was read, I felt nothing for a long moment. Then a quiet release. I was free, not just from the financial chains, but from the illusion that I had ever been truly welcome. Public interest in the case only grew. The story of the forgotten daughter who fought back made headlines, complete with footage of my exclusion from the wedding. Overnight, friends who had distanced themselves reached out in solidarity. Invitations arrived from organizations I had long admired. I was offered a seat at tables where for years I had been left standing. Through it all, I remembered Margaret's words. "Justice is not about revenge, Evelyn. It's about restoring what was lost and reminding those who forget that the truth in time finds its way to the surface." If you have ever been forced to choose between peace and dignity, you know there is a moment when you stop asking for acceptance and begin demanding respect. The Monroe name would never hold the same power again. But for the first time, mine finally meant something. The weeks after the courtroom victory unfolded with a strange clarity. I had spent years, maybe my whole life, bracing for the next disappointment, making myself small to fit the Monroe family's frame. Now suddenly there were no expectations, no obligations, just a long, quiet space where grief and vindication sat side by side. I had gained everything that was mine, yet it was the feeling of loss that lingered, not for the family itself, but for the years wasted hoping for their love. But this was not the end, only the beginning of the reckoning. News of the verdict traveled fast, further than I expected. The tabloids loved the story, the disowned daughter who exposed family fraud. Headlines painted me as either a tragic figure or a folk hero. Heiress reclaims fortune from adoptive family ran side by side with Monroe scandal rocks Upper East Side. My face, once invisible in the family's staged holiday cards, was everywhere, sometimes smiling, sometimes looking far too tired for my age. Charlotte's wedding video became a cautionary tale endlessly reshared as a symbol of public humiliation and private betrayal. Clips of me being turned away at the plaza trended on social media, now reframed as injustice rather than entitlement. The comment sections swelled with people who saw their own wounds reflected in my story. "You spoke for all of us who've been used and discarded," one message read. "Thank you for not letting them win." But the real aftermath played out quietly behind closed doors, in rooms where power and reputation once insulated the Monroes from consequences. First, the family's finances collapsed. My trust fund and all related assets were frozen pending full restitution. The Manhattan apartment, long since renovated and rented out at a premium, became legally mine overnight. A team of forensic accountants hired by Margaret discovered years of questionable withdrawals and unauthorized loans taken out in my name. Every dollar had to be returned down to the last cent. The court imposed additional penalties for the attempted forgery. The Monroe family's accounts, once overflowing, dwindled with each passing day. Creditors lined up. The family's summer home in the Hamptons was quietly listed for sale, as was Mr. Monroe's classic car collection and Olivia's luxury condo. For years, they'd lived as if the future was guaranteed. Now the bills came due all at once. Charlotte's new marriage, meant to be the start of her fairy tale, quickly soured under the weight of scandal. Her in-laws, wary of association, withdrew support. The startup she'd launched on borrowed funds collapsed when investors pulled out, unwilling to risk their own names. Olivia's influencer status evaporated. Brands distanced themselves, and her following melted away, replaced by angry comments and mockery. The socialites who once sought her out now turned cold. Nobody wants to catch scandal by association. Mrs. Monroe tried to reach out, first by email, then by letter, all filled with vague apologies and pleas for understanding. "You know, deep down we always wanted what was best for you," she wrote. "But I had learned what those words really meant. We wanted what was best for us, and you were useful." Margaret, my steadfast advisor, reminded me to maintain the boundary. "You don't owe them closure, Evelyn. Closure is something you give yourself." Mr. Monroe, proud to the end, sent only a single message through his attorney. "We hope you'll be fair with what you've gained. After all, family is family." The words rang hollow after everything he'd orchestrated. And yet it wasn't rage that guided me. I wanted no revenge for the sake of pain. I wanted restoration of truth, of my own place in the world. So I made choices that reflected my values, not theirs. The Manhattan apartment became a home for myself and for others who'd lost their way. Margaret helped me establish a fund to support young people aging out of foster care, a tribute to the part of me that had always known what it meant to be an outsider. The Monroe Foundation, now under my legal control, was restructured. Grants were awarded to organizations serving adopted children and survivors of family betrayal. Each public announcement was both a closure and a new opening, a way to reclaim a story that had for so long been told by others. One late afternoon, as summer pressed against the city windows, I found myself standing in the entryway of the apartment. The sunlight touched the polished floors, glancing off framed photos, some old, some new. Not a single Monroe smiled out from those frames now. Instead, there were snapshots of friends of Margaret, of children who had found a home because of the foundation's work. The space felt lighter, honest, in a way it had never been before. The press, persistent to the end, wanted a statement. So I wrote one, not for headlines, but for myself and for anyone who'd ever been told they were expendable. This house was never yours. It's mine now, not because I won a court battle, but because I know my own worth. Family is not about shared blood or even shared history. It is about loyalty, respect, and the willingness to show up when it matters. I wish the Monroe family peace, but I do not wish for their return. Word spread. People I'd never met sent letters, emails, messages of solidarity. I received invitations to speak, to mentor, to join organizations and boards I'd once only watched from a distance. Each invitation felt like a small step away from the shadows, a gentle affirmation that the world was larger than the confines of any one family's approval. But what mattered most was the quiet, the mornings I woke up without dread, the evenings spent in laughter, the feeling of a future uncluttered by obligation. One day, nearly a year after the wedding, I received an invitation, unsigned but familiar in its careful script, to attend a family reunion. I smiled as I tossed it into the recycling bin. Some doors once closed should stay that way. If you have ever had to stand alone, know this: solitude is not the same as loneliness. Sometimes it is the beginning of everything you were meant to build. I am Evelyn Monroe, and this time the story ends on my terms. 6 months have passed since the verdict. At times it feels longer. At other moments I still startle awake, expecting to find myself in the old Monroe house, listening for the familiar hum of disapproval under every breath. But life has a way of remaking itself when we least expect it, often in the spaces left behind after a storm. My days now begin in my own Manhattan apartment, a space once acquired by others for the sake of appearances, now transformed into something honest, quietly beautiful. I have repainted the walls with soft, hopeful colors, arranged my grandmother's quilt on the bed, filled the shelves with books, not trophies. My mornings are gentle coffee brewed just for me, sunlight through uncontained windows, the absence of tension in the air. I spend time in my small rooftop garden, planting herbs and watching tiny shoots break through the earth, a simple reminder that new life always finds a way. My work has changed too. I left behind the world of finance and now dedicate my days to the foundation Margaret and I rebuilt from the ashes of the old Monroe legacy. The Evelyn Initiative, as we named it, serves young adults aging out of foster care, providing housing scholarships, and most of all, a sense of belonging. Our offices are filled with laughter, with stories of perseverance and survival. Every week, I meet someone who reminds me of who I was at 18, hopeful, frightened, determined not to let the past dictate the future. My chosen family has become my greatest strength. There is Margaret, whose sharp wit has softened into friendship and who still brings tea and wise counsel on stormy days. There are colleagues, volunteers, young people who call or write just to say thank you. Dinners at my apartment are simple but joyful potlucks instead of catered affair stories instead of formal speeches. The table feels fuller than it ever did at any Monroe gathering. Here nobody sits at the edge of the photograph. Professionally, I have found peace in using what I once built for others to build something for myself and for those who need it most. Each grant approved, each scholarship awarded, feels like a small act of justice, not against the Monroes, but for the silent children and forgotten teens whose stories too often go untold. I mentor whenever I can, reminding the next generation that worth is never determined by family approval, but by character, persistence, and kindness. Occasionally, the past tries to intrude: a newspaper article, a stray message from an old acquaintance, a Monroe family rumor winding its way through social circles. My answer always is the same: polite silence. The Monroes, for their part, have receded from view. I hear from friends in the city that Mr. Monroe spends his days embroiled in lawsuits and endless debt negotiations. Olivia left New York trying to start over in California with little success. Charlotte, I'm told, divorced and moved back in with her mother, neither speaking of the wedding that changed everything. There are no more public declarations, no more staged family photos. Their world, once so carefully curated, has turned in on itself. Every so often, I am asked if I regret taking my family to court, if I wish things had ended differently. My answer never changes. I wish for their healing, not for reconciliation. True family, I have learned, is not about shared blood or even a shared past. It is built in the daily acts of respect, honesty, and love freely given and received. I am not immune to loneliness. Some nights memories creep in, the feeling of sitting outside the wedding, the sting of words meant to exclude. But now I let those feelings come and go like a storm that waters the garden but does not destroy the roots. Instead, I turn to my new traditions: Sunday dinners with friends, letters from foundation graduates, the quiet pride of seeing my own name on a door that once excluded me. I would not wish my journey on anyone, but I am grateful for the lessons it forced me to learn. If you are listening and have ever been told that you are unworthy, I hope you remember this. Your value is not defined by the people who failed to see it. You are allowed to create your own family, to draw your own boundaries, and to demand the respect you give others. Before I end, let me ask you, have you ever had to redefine the meaning of family? Do you believe that forgiveness should always be given, or can respect and distance be acts of self-love? I would love to hear your thoughts. If my story resonates with you, share your own below, or simply take this as a quiet reminder: you are not alone. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not justice served cold, but a life lived warmly, honestly, and on your own terms. Thank you for walking with me to the end. I am Evelyn Monroe, and I have finally come home.